I had promised my virginity to a man I barely knew, but fate had other plans. One encounter with a fierce Apache warrior shattered everything I thought I knew about love, desire, and freedom. Asterisk. The story opens in the quiet, sun-drenched parlor of a grand Victorian-era house. Sunlight streams through the delicate lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the polished wooden floors. The room smells faintly of lavender and polished wood, a scent that always reminded her of safety and order. Yet today, that familiar scent does nothing to soothe the storm inside her. She sits rigidly on a high-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her dress, stiff and ornate, feels like armor, suffocating her as much as the expectations of her family. Across from her, her mother sits in a chair of equal grandeur, her face calm but serious. There is no warmth in her eyes today, only the steady, unwavering gaze of someone who has always been more loyal to tradition than to the whims of the heart. She reaches over, placing a gentle but firm hand on her daughter's, and begins to speak. Her voice is measured, like a metronome marking the rhythm of a life already planned. "You have a duty," she says, and the words echo in the young woman's mind like a drumbeat. "A promise was made before you were even born. Your future, your honor, your very virtue, it belongs to the family." To him. The young woman swallows hard, the taste of iron rising in her throat. She has heard these words countless times in different forms, yet hearing them now, so final and unyielding, sends a shiver down her spine. She knows whom her mother means, her fiancé, a man she has met only a handful of times, polite and proper, the embodiment of stability but utterly unknown. She cannot deny that he is respectable, even kind, in the way that someone can be when they are performing the role their family has scripted for them. Yet she cannot bring herself to love him, not yet, perhaps never. The thought of a future bound to someone she barely knows is a cage she cannot yet accept. As her mother's words sink in, the young woman's mind drifts to the promise itself. She had made it as a child, a naive, almost ceremonial vow, not understanding the gravity it carried. At the time, it felt like a story, something distant, abstract. But now, with adulthood pressing against her chest like a heavy cloak, it feels real, inescapable. The weight of expectation presses down on her, and with each heartbeat, she feels herself shrinking beneath it. Yet even as she nods politely, pretending to accept the inevitability of her fate, a quiet rebellion stirs within her. It begins as a whisper in the back of her mind, a fleeting thought she barely allows herself to consider. What if there is more to life than duty? What if the heart could choose, even just once? These thoughts feel dangerous, almost forbidden, as if merely acknowledging them is an act of betrayal. Still, they grow louder, threading themselves into the cracks of her composure. Her mother notices nothing, engrossed in a discussion of arrangements, dates, social events, and the intricacies of etiquette. The fiancé is mentioned only in passing, described in terms of property, status, and suitability rather than as a human being. The young woman's stomach tightens. This is the life she is expected to embrace, a life of carefully measured gestures and hollow smiles. The very idea makes her pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and a strange exhilaration. As the conversation winds down, the young woman glances out the window. Beyond the lace curtains, the garden stretches wide and wild, sunlit and untamed. The roses climb in chaotic bursts, their petals vibrant and unrestrained. In that moment, she envies them, the freedom they embody, their disregard for order or expectation. And somewhere deep in her heart, a single, fragile hope begins to bloom. That maybe, just maybe, her life need not be dictated entirely by promises made long before she could understand their consequences. This scene ends with her sitting alone for a moment after her mother departs, the house suddenly silent but heavy with the weight of expectation. Her fingers unconsciously traced the lace of her dress, as if seeking comfort from the very restrictions that confine her. She breathes in deeply, feeling the tension in her chest, the conflict between obedience and desire. The promise remains looming and immovable, but a spark of something else flickers in her heart. Curiosity, longing, and the faint, irresistible pull of a life that could be hers if she dared to follow it. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the horizon in shades of crimson and gold. The frontier town lay at the edge of a vast wilderness, a place where law and tradition met untamed freedom. The young woman had come seeking respite from her rigid, ordered life, hoping that a brief journey would provide clarity, perhaps even a taste of independence. She had no idea that this journey would upend everything she had ever believed about love and desire. As she wandered along a winding trail leading out of town, she noticed movement near the edge of a clearing. Shadows danced beneath the towering pines, and the flicker of a small fire caught her eye. There, standing tall and poised, was a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his hair long and dark, braided intricately, and his eyes sharp yet calm, like a predator aware of its surroundings but unthreatened by them. The aura around him was magnetic, wild yet controlled, dangerous yet compelling. He noticed her immediately, his gaze steady and unflinching. She felt as though he could see into her very soul, and for a moment she froze. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something deeper that she couldn't name. The air between them seemed charged, electric, as though the universe itself had paused to witness this meeting. She tried to avert her gaze, feeling the weight of propriety pressing down on her, but she found herself unable to move. There was an intensity in him that transcended words, a raw, unspoken understanding of life and the world that seemed both terrifying and intoxicating. She felt exposed, as if he could see not only her exterior, but the thoughts and emotions she had worked so hard to keep hidden. He stepped closer, not threateningly, but with a quiet confidence that suggested he belonged to the wilderness, and yet, somehow, to her as well. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting sharp cheekbones and a jawline both strong and noble. He extended a hand, not in command, but as an invitation. "Who are you?" She whispered, barely believing she was speaking aloud. "I am called Morning Eagle," he replied, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of someone who had lived fully and freely. There was a pause, then a smile that was subtle but undeniable, warm yet unrestrained. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the distant sounds of the town fading into insignificance. The young woman felt something awaken inside her, a spark of excitement, of life that had lain dormant under the weight of expectations and promises. She realized, almost with a jolt, that she had never felt so alive, so seen, or so drawn to another person in her entire life. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every breath a declaration of newfound freedom. She wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of her carefully structured world, but she could not move. Something about this man, this encounter, called to the part of her that longed to break free from chains she hadn't yet dared to question. In that fleeting, magical moment, she understood that her journey was no longer just a physical one, it was a journey of the heart, of awakening, of discovering desires she had long suppressed. And so, under the crimson sky of the frontier, her fate began to shift. The promise she had made, so absolute in its certainty, suddenly seemed distant, fragile, almost irrelevant in the face of a connection she could neither explain nor resist. The Apache had taken root in her heart, quietly, powerfully, irrevocably. The nights in the frontier town were quiet, broken only by the occasional howl of a distant coyote or the crackling of the campfire. After that first encounter, the young woman found herself drawn back to the clearing, unable to resist the pull of the Apache warrior. Each visit was a dance between danger and desire, propriety and passion. She knew the world she came from would never approve. Yet a part of her, a part she had kept hidden under layers of obedience, thrived in the freedom of this forbidden connection. Even sitting beside him, she felt a thrill that coursed through her like electricity. They shared stories of their lives, worlds apart, yet connected by a growing, undeniable bond. He spoke of the land, the wind, and the sky as if they were living beings. She listened, mesmerized, feeling her heart expand in ways she never imagined. Each word drew her closer to him, each glance tethering her to a world that felt alive, untamed and intoxicating. The Apache's presence was magnetic. The way he moved, graceful, precise, confident, made the young woman acutely aware of her own heartbeat. Her fingers brushed against his by accident, and the simple contact sent warmth racing through her veins. She felt a blush creeping across her cheeks, a heat in her chest that she could neither name nor suppress. Every shared smile, every subtle gesture, felt like a secret rebellion against the life she had been promised, yet guilt shadowed her every thought. The promise of virginity, the engagement arranged by her family, weighed heavily on her mind. She would close her eyes at night and imagine her fiancé's calm, respectable face and feel a pang of shame at the warmth that surged whenever she thought of the Apache. It was a conflict she could not reconcile. The world demanded obedience, but her heart screamed for freedom. Their connection deepened over time. They laughed together under the stars, sharing songs and tales that transcended language. The desert night became their sanctuary, a hidden world where societal rules held no sway. She discovered the beauty of living in the moment, of allowing herself to feel without restraint. In his eyes she saw courage, honor, and a raw vitality that her carefully sheltered world had never offered. There were moments of silence, too, where words were unnecessary. She would watch him as he tended the fire or gazed at the moon and feel a longing so profound it bordered on pain. It was in those quiet moments that she realized the depth of her desire. It was not merely physical, though the tension between them was undeniable, but emotional, a craving to be known, understood, and accepted completely. But the world beyond the clearing was always lurking, ready to remind her of her obligations. Every night, when she returned to her lodgings, the shadow of the promise she had made pressed down upon her like a cold weight. Still, the memory of his touch, his gaze, and the freedom he represented lingered in her mind, an intoxicating temptation she could not resist, and so she returned, night after night, stepping further into forbidden's territory. Each moment with him leaving her more conflicted, yet more alive than ever before. She knew this attraction was dangerous, that the heart she was cultivating could break her future, but she could not help herself. The Apache had awakened something deep inside her, a passion and vitality that defied duty, a longing she could no longer deny. In the quiet of the night, with the fire crackling and stars sparkling overhead, she realized a truth that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Love, in its purest, most powerful form, does not ask for permission. And for the first time in her life, she understood that following her heart might mean defying everything she had been taught to value. As days passed, the young woman's secret encounters with the Apache warrior became increasingly difficult to conceal. What had begun as stolen moments under the stars now occupied her every thought, tugging at her heart even in the safety of her lodgings. She felt a delicious, terrifying pull between two worlds, the structured, predictable life she was promised and the wild, intoxicating freedom the Apache represented. Rumors began to spread in the frontier town. Whispers followed her in the streets, and she noticed furtive glances from townsfolk who seemed to sense the forbidden nature of her meetings. Her fiancé, once a distant figure in her life, began to appear more frequently, his composed demeanor shadowed by suspicion. Every interaction with him now felt charged, every smile forced and hollow. The knowledge that he was watching, that her family might discover the truth, tightened the coil of anxiety in her chest. She tried to maintain her composure, to pretend that nothing had changed. Yet inside, a storm raged. Her feelings for the Apache were no longer fleeting infatuation. They were profound, consuming, and impossible to deny. She found herself imagining his face during the dull hours of the day, remembering the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze. Guilt clawed at her relentlessly. She remembered the promise she had made, the vow of virginity and loyalty, and wondered if she had already betrayed it simply by feeling. Tension reached its peak one evening when her fiancé confronted her. The setting was a formal parlor, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and candle wax. He spoke in measured tones, calm but edged with unease. His questions were subtle, probing. Why she had been distracted, why her eyes often drifted to the horizon, and why she seemed more restless than ever before. Each word was like a small blade cutting through her carefully constructed facade. At the same time, the Apache's presence was never far from her mind. She longed to run back to the clearing, to feel the firelight on her skin, to hear his voice soothing the tumult in her heart. Yet she could not. The world she knew, her family, her obligations, her promise, was pressing in, demanding obedience and restraint. Her internal conflict became almost unbearable. Every stolen thought of the Apache was a rebellion. Every glance at her fiancé was a reminder of duty. She felt as though she were being torn in two directions, each one pulling her with equal force. Sleep brought no relief. In the quiet darkness of her room, she imagined confrontations, escapes, confession scenarios that thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. The nights grew restless, the frontier town quiet but ever watchful. She realized she was living on the edge of two realities, the one she was born into and the one she longed for. And though fear and guilt clung to her like shadows, a part of her recognized that the heart cannot be commanded or contained. The Apache had awakened something primal and undeniable, a truth she could not ignore. Love, passion, and freedom were calling her, and the path forward would demand courage, defiance, and sacrifice. The scene closes with her standing by a window, gazing at the moonlit wilderness beyond the town. She clenches her hands at her sides, feeling the tension in every fiber of her body. Behind her, the walls of tradition and expectation loom large, but before her, the dark, endless possibilities of freedom stretch into the night. The choice is coming, and she knows that no matter what she decides, her life will never be the same again. The frontier stretched out before her like a living, breathing world, wild and untamed. For the first time in her life, she felt a strange exhilaration, as though the earth itself were welcoming her into its rhythm. Riding alongside the Apache warrior, she noticed how differently he moved through the world, attuned to the wind, the terrain, and the subtle whispers of the natural world. Every gesture, every step, spoke of a life lived fully, without the invisible chains of societal expectation. Contrast this with the life she had always known. Her upbringing had been rigid, each day carefully structured, each thought measured and constrained by tradition. Her family prized respectability, order, and duty above all else. Even her fiancé, polite and composed, embodied that structure, predictable, safe, but lacking the fire and vitality that now pulsed through her veins. The Apache taught her the names of plants, the paths of animals, and the signs of approaching storms. He moved with an ease that belied strength, demonstrating skill in archery, horseback riding, and tracking. Watching him, she felt a combination of awe and desire. He was alive in ways her carefully curated world had never allowed her to be, and she hungered for that freedom, even as fear and guilt gnawed at her conscience. One afternoon, he showed her how to ride a horse without a saddle, balancing with confidence as the animal galloped across the plains. She clung to him at first, tense and uncertain, but slowly the thrill of movement overtook her fear. The wind whipped through her hair, and for a moment she forgot the world she had left behind, the promises, the etiquette, the looming presence of her fiancé. In that instant, she understood the stark difference between her old life and this new existence, one confined by rules, the other liberated by instinct, trust, and courage. Yet even as she embraced these new experiences, her upbringing tugged at her relentlessly. She knew that her family would never understand, that her actions could bring shame or scandal. Every heartbeat reminded her that her freedom came with danger, not only from the wilderness but from society itself. And yet, the more she immersed herself in the Apache's world, the more alive she felt. Every laugh, every shared glance, every lesson in the ways of the land became a declaration of independence. A step away from the life she had been promised. By nightfall, she would sit by the fire, hands intertwined with his, sharing stories that transcended language and culture. The Apache's life was one of honor, loyalty, and deep connection to the world around him, a stark contrast to the rigid, duty-bound existence she had always known. It was both intoxicating and terrifying, for the more she embraced this freedom, the more she realized how trapped she had been. In those quiet moments, she confronted the truth. Her heart was no longer bound by promises or tradition. She was awakening to a life of her own choosing, one that demanded courage, self-discovery, and the willingness to face disapproval, judgment, and even danger. The clash between the world she had been born into and the world the Apache offered was undeniable, and yet, she knew that to ignore this pull would be to deny the deepest desires of her heart. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, she realized that her life had changed irreversibly. The Apache had opened a door to freedom, love, and passion, a door she could never close again. The choice lay ahead, and though fear and doubt lingered, the thrill of embracing the unknown filled her with a sense of power and possibility she had never known. The days of secret meetings and whispered laughter could not last forever. Fate has a way of demanding a price for forbidden love. It began one evening when the air felt heavy, the sky painted in streaks of purple and storm gray. She had just returned from the plains, her cheeks flushed from riding beside the Apache, her heart brimming with the thrill of freedom. But when she entered the parlor of her family's home, she found her fiancé waiting. His face was grave, his eyes filled with something she had never seen before, anger laced with desperation. "Where have you been?" he demanded. His voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it betrayed the storm inside him. She froze, her body rigid, her lips trembling. For a moment, she considered lying, but she knew the truth had already reached him. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a sharp whisper. "You promised yourself to me. And yet, I hear your heart belongs elsewhere." Her chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words would not come. He left her standing there, the silence heavier than his accusations. That night, she returned to the clearing where the Apache waited. His presence calmed her, his eyes steady and unwavering as if he already knew of the turmoil she carried. But before she could speak, the distant sound of hooves thundered across the plains. Lanterns glowed in the distance, her fiancé and a group of townsmen closing in fast. Panic surged in her chest. She looked to the Apache, who stood tall, his expression unreadable. He grasped her hand tightly, his grip firm but not forceful. In his eyes she saw the silent question, "Do you choose them? Or me?" The moment stretched into eternity. Behind her lay duty, family, the safety of a life already written. Before her stood danger, passion, and freedom, but also uncertainty. Her mind screamed for caution, for obedience. Yet her heart thundered for love, for the fire that only the Apache had ignited. The riders approached, shouts echoing in the night. She could feel her fiancé's voice calling her, commanding her, promising stability. But the Apache's silence spoke louder than any word. His hand trembled slightly, betraying the strength it took to let her decide for herself. And in that instant, her choice became clear. She gripped his hand tighter, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm staying with you." The Apache's eyes softened, pride and love flickering within them. He pulled her close as the lantern lights grew brighter. Together, they stood against the storm, ready to face whatever came. For the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path not out of duty, but out of love. This was the moment that defined her, the moment she broke free from chains of expectation and embraced a life of passion, danger, and freedom. The confrontation could not be avoided forever. Word of her defiance spread quickly through the town, reaching the ears of her family like wildfire. To them, her actions were not only a betrayal of her fiancé but a disgrace to the family name. Her mother's face, usually composed and dignified, now carried lines of shock and disappointment. Her fiancé, wounded pride burning in his eyes, demanded answers. The weight of centuries of tradition pressed down upon her as they gathered in the parlor, the air thick with judgment. She stood at the center, her hands trembling, her heart pounding like a drum of war. For years she had been obedient, quiet, willing to accept the life chosen for her. But now, standing between her mother's stern glare and her fiancé's wounded anger, she realized she could not continue living in chains. "I cannot marry him," she said, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. "I cannot give my heart where it does not belong." Gasps echoed in the room. Her mother's hand clutched at her pearls. Her fiancé's jaw tightened, his composure cracking. But she pressed on, her voice unwavering now. "I love another. And for the first time in my life, I am choosing for myself." The silence that followed was deafening. She could feel the air tighten, as though the entire house itself rejected her words. But with each passing second, she grew taller, stronger. The fear that had bound her began to loosen, falling away like rusted chains. Later that night, under the vast canopy of stars, she returned to the clearing where the Apache waited. Her heart was racing, but not with fear. This time, it was exhilaration. She found him standing by the fire, his posture calm but his eyes searching hers for an answer. She stepped toward him, her voice steady. "I've chosen. It's you. It has always been you." For the first time since they met, his expression softened completely. Relief and joy mingled in his gaze as he reached out to her. When their hands met, it felt less like touch and more like a vow, forged in the fire of sacrifice and courage. As dawn approached, they stood together at the edge of a cliff, the sky awash with streaks of rose and gold. She looked out at the vast, untamed land stretching endlessly before them. It was symbolic, a mirror of the life that awaited her, unpredictable, dangerous, but free. By breaking her chains, she had not only chosen the Apache, she had chosen herself. Her voice, once silenced by duty, now carried with it the power of defiance, courage, and love. For the first time, she was not living someone else's story. She was writing her own. The storm had passed. Not just the one in the sky, but the one inside her. For the first time in her life, the chains of duty and fear no longer bound her. She had chosen her heart, her freedom, and her future. The dawn stretched across the horizon like a golden promise. She stood at the edge of the wilderness beside the Apache, the rising sun painting the plains in shades of amber and rose. The air smelled of fresh earth after rain, of wildflowers stirred by the wind. It was as if the land itself was welcoming her home. She glanced at him, strong, steady, his eyes soft as they met hers. The uncertainty that had once shadowed their every interaction was gone. Now there was only trust. In his world, she had found not just love, but a reflection of herself, wild, untamed, yearning to be free. Together, they mounted their horses. She no longer rode with hesitation. Her back was straight, her hand sure. Gone was the timid girl who once clung to tradition. In her place was a woman reborn, daring enough to ride into an unknown future with her heart unchained. They rode through the plains as the sun rose higher, the landscape rolling out endlessly before them. Each gallop felt like a drumbeat of freedom. Each gust of wind reminded her that she had escaped a life written by others to embrace a destiny of her own making. That night, as they camped beneath the stars, she rested against him, the firelight flickering across their faces. She felt the warmth of his hand in hers and knew, without a shadow of doubt, that she had chosen rightly. The stars above stretched on forever, a reminder that their story was only beginning. This was not the end, it was the beginning of a life uncharted, dangerous, but filled with passion, love, and endless possibility. "I was promised to another," she whispered softly, more to herself than to him, "but my heart was always yours." The Apache pressed a kiss to her forehead, his silence more powerful than words. Together, they stared into the horizon where the unknown awaited them. Not with fear, but with courage. And so her story did not end with chains of tradition or the suffocating walls of expectation. It began here, in the wild heart of the land, beside the man who had awakened her spirit.